We've all heard the stories, heard a bump in the night, seen something we couldn't explain. We've even felt cold breezes when there shouldn't be any. And in this top 10, I'm gonna show you the most haunted places in the country. Sweetheart, trying to shoot a video in here.
Oh, grow up. Go start real.
Well, there was pretty much no coming back from that, so I decided to take the night off. But let's hop right in to the top 10 most haunted places in the country. Opened in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is a popular tourist attraction, especially around Halloween. But a lot of people contend that it's not just the living that are in attendance. 142 years old and built for hardcore criminals, Eastern State Penitentiary has truly seen some terrible things. Not surprisingly, ghost stories abound because of the treatment that the inmates suffered during their time there. One such treatment that inmates had to suffer was called the water bath, which was essentially when they were sprayed down with the hose and hung up on one of the prison walls during the winter until ice started to form on their skin, and then they were taken down.
Oh, thank you.
Next was the mad chair, which was essentially when the inmates were tied to a chair so tightly that where they were tied actually began to cut off circulation, and this usually led to amputation of certain parts of their bodies.
No respect.
Another one of the punishments that inmates had to endure was known as the hole, which was essentially what it sounds like, and it was a cell in the bottom of the basement which had no light source, had poor air ventilation, had no bathroom, no exercise, and you effectively went insane for as long as you were there, just submerged in darkness.
I felt a simple timeout would have been sufficient.
Now, despite the treatment of the inmates and the ghost stories that abound, plus sightings, the Eastern State Penitentiary staff that works there now as a tourist destination are still staunchly committed to the idea that there are no ghosts and do not like to focus on the dark past of the facility. Now, the House of the Seven Gables probably rings a bell, but not for the reasons you'd think. It's the oldest house in New England built of wood, and it is the house that actually inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne's famous work.
Who the hell cares?
Now, the house's history is a little sad, as it was owned by a litany of merchant sailors who subsequently all died at sea and wound up leaving it to their next of kin. So there is a lot of unrest and there is a lot of death surrounding the house. But despite that, all the presences at the house seem to be fairly benign, and there are three prominent ones that most people talk about. One, there is a strong unknown presence which no one can really seem to point an actual finger to. Two, there is a little boy who just likes to, he just hangs out there. He doesn't bother anybody. And three is one of the former house owners, known as Susan Ingersoll, who usually stands at the window or can be seen looking out from a window to people on the outside of the house. Now, despite the fact that there are at least three apparitions that occupy the house, and they are benign, they're not afraid to make their presence felt. Many people say that visiting the house, it is not unusual for water faucets to turn on and off by themselves, and for lights to flicker on and off without anyone touching them. Erected in 1737, the St. Augustine Lighthouse in St. Augustine, Florida, is the oldest structure in the city, and probably the most haunted too. The lighthouse has been surrounded by death for a long time, with one of its first groundskeepers, a man named Peter Rumsen, actually falling to his death from the top of the lighthouse.
Damn! He ain't gonna be in rush hour 3.
People claim to have seen Peter roaming the grounds, but his presence is more strongly felt when people smell cigar smoke, which Rumsen was actually a very big fan of cigars. Joseph Andrew is another life that was claimed by the lighthouse who fell to his death while he was actually painting it. Many people have observed Joseph sitting at the top of the lighthouse alone on many different nights. Two more lives that were claimed by the lighthouse were Mary and Eliza, who were playing in a cart when the cart broke loose from its supports and actually plummeted into the water, killing both girls. As sad as the story is, their presence can still be seen too at the lighthouse, as many people have actually reported hearing child's laughter on nights when the air is still and the moon is full.
Come play.
Built in 1909 by Freeland Oscar Stanley, the Stanley Hotel, located in Colorado, is the notorious hotel which inspired Stephen King to write his famous novel, The Shining.
Here's Johnny.
But This hotel had a very trepid past long before Mr. King decided to write about it.
And if you don't like it, you can leave.
Dying in 1940, Stanley is actually said to still haunt the downstairs of the hotel, mainly keeping to the bar and the billiards room. And his wife Flora has also been seen walking around downstairs as well. The second floor is home to room 217 and Miss Elizabeth Wilson, who was injured in a lantern explosion, but actually did survive, not dying until several years after. Just like Flora and Stanley, Miss Wilson is actually a very peaceful presence too, with the one exception that she doesn't approve of unwed couples, and couples who stay in room 217 or anywhere on the second floor usually say they feel a cold presence sitting between them, just given a little bit of buffer space. As for the rest of the hotel, there are several children that are said to inhabit the Stanley Hotel, including one boy named Billy.
It doesn't matter what your name is!
Who had special needs while he was alive, and now tends to gravitate towards people who either have relatives that are special needs themselves or work with them on a daily basis. Regardless of if the children are friendly or not, I don't think there can be anything creepier than hearing disembodied laughter on the third and fourth floors of the Stanley Hotel.
Come play with us forever.
So visit at your own risk. It opened on New Year's Day in 1927, and originally called the Community Hotel, Hotel Monte Vista has a very rich past full of a lot of interesting characters. Underneath the hotel, there is a series of connected tunnels that were supposedly built by Chinese immigrants. As for the hotel itself, it actually hosted a speakeasy until 1931 when it was shut down by Prohibition officers. But you don't want a history lesson, you want to know what makes this place so haunted. So let's get to it. 3 of the most famous ghosts occupy specific rooms based on where they spent their time during their life. In room 220, there's known as the Meat Man.
To notice you can be proud of.
Who was a longtime tenant and in life liked to hang meat from the chandelier and still does so in death. He's also been known to touch guests and play around with the TV, causing it to go on and off, flicker, and just play with the volume for the sake of it. In room 305, there's an old lady who perpetually sits in a rocking chair near the window, gazing out at nothing like she did when she was alive. No one knows what she was looking for then, no one knows what she's looking for now.
Hey!
But she also is known to be in the closet and actually does knock on the back of the closet wall, I guess just to let you know she's there. Of all the ghosts at the Monte Vista Hotel, room 306 probably houses the most insidious, if you can call them that. During the 1940s, 2 call girls, ladies of the night, you get the euphemism, were taken to room 306 where they were subsequently stabbed and murdered and then thrown out the window onto the street below.
When they're dead, they're just hookers.
Visitors who have stayed and continue to stay in this room say that they wake up at night unable to fall back asleep because they can feel that they're being watched, and male visitors to the room often wake up to the frightening feeling of having hands placed over their mouths or around their necks, feeling like they're being strangled. So if you had been thinking about staying at the Monte Vista Hotel, room 306, I'd warn you against it because there's much better ways to get a breathtaking view.
I also like to live dangerously.
Located in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, the Crescent Hotel has a bit of a sordid past. Bought by Norman G. Baker in 1937, who was a noted inventor, he decided to turn the house into a hospital for cancer patients. There was just one problem with this: he had no medical training.
Trust me, I'm a doctor.
As you can imagine, the plan didn't go swimmingly, and a lot of people wound up dying, possibly needless deaths. So many people wound up dying, in fact, that they were all stored in the morgue located in the basement, and psychic mediums have said that this most likely opened a portal to another realm. People who go to the Crescent Hotel today routinely see Baker's patients walking the halls aimlessly. As if that wasn't enough, people can also go down to the morgue and they routinely see small children hiding under autopsy tables, screaming and begging for help from people. With all this paranormal activity and turmoil that took place here, you can bet it's a haven for paranormal enthusiasts, to the point that there's a seance held, a pretty notable one, every Halloween in the main theater.
It's showtime.
Built in 1794, Myrtles Plantation in Louisiana has played host to at least 10 different murders in its lifetime. No, actually there was just one murder. There have been several deaths from disease and at least one drowning, if that's any more positive.
This guy's a moron!
Of the many ghosts that haunt the plantation, by far the most famous one is Chloe, who was actually photographed in 1994 by National Geographic. As the story goes, Chloe was intimately involved with the owner of the plantation and feared going back to the fields if she ever fell out of favor with him. One day when she was eavesdropping, she was caught and she had her ear cut off as punishment. In retaliation for the ear fiasco, she actually poisoned the family, killing Sarah Matilda and their 2 children. Fearing for their own lives, the rest of the slaves on the plantation supposedly dragged Chloe out into a field and hung her themselves as a show of obedience to the master. Now, I told you that to tell you this. Unfortunately, the people who owned the plantation at the time never owned slaves. They didn't even have 2 girls like the story says. They had 1 girl and 1 boy.
I don't know, man. I think you piss a lot of people off that way.
So the strangest part about this plantation is it's apparently haunted by someone who never actually lived there at all.
Oh, this is unbelievable.
Built in 1857, Whaley House, located in San Diego, California, has at one point been a house, a courthouse, and a commercial theater. Despite all this activity, Whaley House and the ground on it is no stranger to death and tragedy. Playing host to the Violet Whaley suicide, as long as several hangings that took place on the ground that the house was built on,
It's utter chaos down here.
this place is stained in blood. One of the most frequently seen ghosts is a ghost named Yankee Jim, who was hung in 1852 for grand larceny. People can routinely see him walking around, if not hear his boots clomping against the wooden floors. Also getting in on the fun is Thomas Whaley himself and his wife Anna, who has actually been seen by Regis Philbin.
Could you believe it? I need to go back. I'm on deck.
Rounding out the cast of characters is a very small-statured woman who's routinely seen in the courtroom.
It's time to go.
And a young girl who likes to hang out in the dining room. So if you ever happen to be in San Diego, I would swing by the Whaley House. It sure seems to be one-of-a-kind entertainment.
Show gets better every year!
The Giardin La Patrie Mansion, better known as the Sultan's Palace, is located in the French Quarter of New Orleans. The story for this house begins in 1836 when a man of Turkish nationality moved into the house claiming to be a sultan.
It's my time to shine!
Immediately, he began modifying the house, putting bars on the windows and multiple locks on all of the doors that led in and out of the house. Many of the house's neighbors found themselves suspicious of the Sultan and did not appreciate the fact that as night began to fall, the house would turn into a palace of pleasure where incense would abound out the windows as well as loud music. However, nothing actually happened until one day neighbors were walking by and found a trail of blood leading from the front of the house all the way out to the street.
What do you get, your period?
As the story goes, when the police were able to get inside the house, they found that everyone within had actually been hacked to bits, women and children alike. With the exception of the Sultan, who was found in the courtyard, buried alive with his one hand apparently reaching through the dirt as if to try and free himself. Now, despite its past, it's actually owned right now by someone who decided to convert it into 6 different luxury apartments. And the owner does not believe the lures, although she does have to admit that strange occurrences take place on the property, like keys that just go missing and they can never be found.
What, the keys? I want the keys. You've lost your key privileges.
So if you ever move into the Sultan's Palace or one of the apartments, make sure you got a spare set of keys with you at all times. The mansion at 1114 Royal Street, located in the French Quarter of New Orleans, used to be home to Madame Delphine LaLaurie, who later became known as the cruel mistress of the haunted house.
You're a monster!
Now, a little backstory about LaLaurie. She was married 2 times previously to this story, and both husbands died of strange occurrences, let's say. So, as you would, she got married for a 3rd time.
Oh boy, I think I know what's happened.
While living in the mansion in 1834, the house caught on fire. And many people say it was most likely a slave who was chained up in the kitchen who wanted to expose the terrible living conditions that existed in the mansion for slaves, where they were starved, tortured, and eventually murdered. So LaLaurie was a serial killer. Whether it was a chained up slave or not, the fire did call attention of the community to the conditions that were inside the House of Horrors. With the public in such an outrage, LaLaurie and her very young, attractive husband were run out of town.
Those idiots don't even know where we live.
With LaLaurie being gone, the home was actually turned into an apartment complex where one of the tenants was murdered and nothing could be found as a cause for murder except blaming the supernatural. After a failed run as an apartment complex, it actually became an all-girls academy where many of the girls complained about assaults from no one and tripping on nothing routinely. The one ray of sunshine I can offer in this story is that during the early 2000s, the notorious property was actually owned by none other than Nicolas Cage.
Long as I'm in here, you're just gonna sit out there, aren't you?
Alright guys, I hope the video wasn't too scary for you. I just thought it was interesting. I hope you stuck around this long. I hope you're ready for next Monday. I'm primed. I hope you are too. Be sure to subscribe if you liked it. Give me a thumbs up. Comment if it feels right. And until next Monday, continue to shine on, all you crazy diamonds.